As I said at the beginning of the service, as Lisa said at children's time, we're going to talk about Jacob today. The trickster, the one that deceived his brother, deceived his father. We never make note of the fact that Jacob's mom helped him deceive his father. But we're going to take a look at Jacob's story. We're going to take a look at the fact that even though Jacob did all of this stuff, even though Jacob was a deceiver, even though, in Lisa's words, I love, even though Jacob was a little naughty, God still used Jacob. God still found Jacob in a place in which he was fearful, in a place in which it was a dark moment for him. And God used that moment to transform the story and the person of Jacob. To do that, though, we're going to take a look at Jacob's full story. Now, those of you who know Jacob's full story know that if we were really going to do it, we would read all 25 chapters, all of the last 25 chapters of Genesis. Jacob's story starts in chapter 25 and ends with Genesis ending. But I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version of that. If we read all 25 chapters, we might be here a while. So what you need to know about Jacob is this. His mom was struggling to get pregnant. So his father Isaac went to God, prayed to God that Rebekah would become pregnant. And she did. She became pregnant. The pregnancy began to give her a little bit of trouble. She was just struggling with what was going on in her body. And so she decided, you know what, I need to go. Isaac went to the Lord and got me pregnant. So I'm going to go to God and I'm going to find out what's going on. And so Rebekah goes and she finds out, as God says, there are two nations within you. There are two nations struggling within you. There are two groups of people that are within you. And that's why you're struggling. That's why things are happening. The two boys were struggling. They were already beginning to be brothers, I guess you might say. They were already beginning to fight with one another, even while they were inside their mother's womb. Rebekah gave birth. The first child to be born was this red, hairy boy. And so they named him Esau. That's really all Esau means, is hairy. He was covered from head to toe with hair, red hair. The interesting thing about Jacob's birth is Jacob came out grabbing a hold of Esau's heel, as if to say, get back in here, I'm going to be the one that's firstborn, not you. And so begins this turmoil between two brothers. I'm pretty sure you can see this playing out throughout their entire lives. So as the boys grow older, one becomes a hunter, and that was Esau. He becomes a hunter, he loves to work out in the field, and then you've got Jacob, who likes to stay at the tents and apparently cook. So Esau's pretty much a Bass Pro Shop, Outdoors Incorporated guy. Jacob, on the other hand, is a Williams-Sonoma, possibly Pottery Barn kind of guy. So different as night and day. Those of you who are parents, you know your children are typically different as night and day. The older one and the younger one, however it plays out. If you've got more than one child, then you know you've got that many different personalities playing out in your family. So you take all of that, coupled with the fact that Isaac loved Esau, Rebekah loved Jacob. So now you've got not only two brothers that are night and day, two brothers who have struggled from conception almost, but you've got two brothers who know that one parent likes them more than the other, and the other parent likes the other one more than. It's a dysfunctional family story. That's what you find. That's how Jacob's story starts out. It's this idea that there is so much happening within this family that you know trouble is going to happen. And so Jacob, as he gets older, he is doing his thing. Esau comes in off the field one day after hunting, doing whatever it is that Esau did that day, and he is famished. This is the first point in, I think, written history that we find a drama queen or drama king. Esau is a drama king. He comes in off the field and he asks Jacob for a pot of stew or a bowl of stew. And Jacob says, well, give me your birthright. Now I can see that playing out. My parents are here and they can probably see that playing out between my brother Eric and I. There would be this, well, okay, you want that? Well, what are you going to give me? And that's what happens. Jacob says, well, if you want this, you got to give me something. And he said, I'll tell you what I want. I want the birthright. I want to be considered the firstborn. Esau does the one thing that I'm baffled about. This is why I think he's a drama king. He says, well, what good is my birthright if I die? Now, I'm wondering how long he was out in the field, how long he was out in the woods. If he'd been out a day, I mean, I've gone a day without eating. It's not anything that I'm going to give up my birthright for. Yet Esau gives up his birthright. Jacob makes him swear by it. It happens. Fast forward a few more years, Isaac is dying. He's going blind. He brings in Esau to him. He says, listen, I need to bestow upon you the blessing of the firstborn. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to go out into the field. I want you to pick some food. I want you to go kill an animal. I want you to make me a really good meal. I want you to come in. We'll share that meal together. Once we share that meal, I will bestow the blessing upon you. Well, Isaac and Esau didn't know this, but Rebekah was somewhere in the vicinity of that conversation, and she knew what was about to happen. So she goes to Jacob, and she tells Jacob, Jacob, this is about to happen. This is what we're going to do. We're going to make your father a meal. I'm going to dress you like Esau. Then I'm going to take goat skins, and I'm going to put them on your arms because you're not as hairy as your brother. And then we're going to go in. We're going to feed your father that meal because he can't see. And he's going to think you are Esau, and he's going to bestow that blessing upon you, and that's exactly what happened. Then Esau comes in, prepares the meal, goes into his father, and his father's like, well, it's already been done. Well, you can imagine what happens next. Older brother Esau is furious. And he looks at Jacob, and he basically says, listen, when these two over here are gone, we're going to have a little conversation. It's not going to end well for you. I'm going to kill you. Rebekah got wind of that, so she began to arrange an exit for Jacob. Isaac sends Jacob forth with a blessing and instructions to go find your uncle Laban. Jacob shows up to Laban's place, looks at his daughters, one in particular, Rachel. Fell in love with Rachel. Love at first sight, apparently. He wanted to marry Rachel. And so Laban looked at him and said, you work for me 7 years and I will give you Rachel's hand in marriage. Jacob works for 7 years. He comes to the wedding, or gets to the wedding. Rachel is veiled. The ceremony happens. He takes her into his tent. He lifts the veil, only to find out that it's her older sister Leah that he had in fact married. Jacob had met his match. The trickster had been tricked. Jacob confronts Laban on this, and Laban says, well, you know what? You can work for me 7 more years, and I'll give Rachel's hand to you in marriage. And so Jacob works 7 more years for Rachel's hand. I think Laban was pretty smart. He got a young lad, free labor, and all he had to do was give his daughters away in marriage. All of that happens. And there's a lot more to that particular story. And I'm not going to get into that, but I do encourage you to look up that story. The Jacob and Laban interactions are priceless. It's distrust. They leave one another with may the Lord watch between me and thee while we're absent one from another. My second youth group, I said first in 940, but it was my second youth group in Millington. When I was in seminary, that was their benediction. May the Lord watch between me and thee while we're absent one from another. I thought it was kind of cool. It was a blessing from the Bible. It was a benediction, blessing from the Bible. And then I reread Jacob's story. And I particularly reread Laban, the interaction between Jacob and Laban. And I realized that really isn't a great benediction for a church or a youth group for that matter. Because it's a benediction in which Laban is looking at Jacob, and Jacob's looking at Laban, and they're both looking at one another and saying, I don't trust you further than I can throw you. So I'm going to tell you this much. God's watching you. God is watching you. And if you mess up, God knows, and you'll be punished. And that was how they left one another. They didn't leave one another as a happy father-in-law and son-in-law. They left one another distrusting one another. Yet Jacob takes his family and he leaves to go to his homeland. He leaves, and the entire time of his marriage to these two women, 12 sons were produced. Joseph being the favorite, Benjamin being the youngest. You see that favoritism gets passed along, apparently. But Jacob heads home. He heads home, and he gets word as they're nearing Bethel. He gets word that Esau is coming. Esau apparently found out that Jacob was coming back, so Esau gathered up 400 of either his best friends or just 400 men that he knew, and he went after Jacob. Jacob is fearing his life yet again. He comes to the point in which he wrestles with God for an entire night. And during that struggle, Jacob will not let go of this being that he is wrestling. He will not let go. Even when the sun rises, he holds on, and God says, "Let me go." And Jacob says, "Not without a blessing." So God changed Jacob's name to Israel. And then he touched his hip, and Israel walked with a limp for the rest of his life. I kind of think that's one of those moments in which God wanted to make sure that Jacob really understood what was happening to him. God had promised to Jacob in our story that God would be with him. And what does Jacob do? He answers with a big if. He answers with a condition. And yet God's promises are unconditional to Jacob and to us. Like I said, Jacob had 12 sons. It is at the point after Esau and Jacob meet at Bethel, Jacob is forgiven by his brother, and then they part ways. It's like this intense buildup to a simple phrase of "I forgive you." Jacob tries to give some presents to his brother. His brother won't take them. They part ways. Esau goes down to what becomes Edom. Jacob continues on to Bethel. He worships at Bethel. And it's at that point that Jacob's story, Israel's story, becomes Joseph's story. Joseph gets sold off by his brothers. Through a series of events, he finds himself in Pharaoh's house, finds himself gaining power and rising through the ranks. A famine hits the land. Jacob sends his sons to go get food from Egypt. Joseph recognizes his brothers. In a series of events, he reveals himself not only to the brothers but to his father. God then tells Jacob to go to Egypt. It is there that the nation of Israel finds itself enslaved by Egypt. And we think, well, God didn't do what he promised. And yet he does. Because he raises up an ancestor of Jacob's, Moses. And Moses frees God's people and brings Israel back home. You see, when God changed Jacob's name, it wasn't just a name changer. It was helping Jacob realize that he was more than just one human, but yet through him there would be a great nation. And that is, in fact, what happens. That is ultimately Jacob's story. And so we find ourselves beginning to see, I hope, that we are like Jacob. We are like the trickster. We are like the one who's naughty. I love that word. I love that word. We are naughty. We run from God. We run in fear of our lives. We run in fear with our anxious thoughts, fear of what is happening in the world around us. We are like Jacob. We are like Jacob in the sense that we have fallen short, but yet God comes to us. And God meets us, and God finds us, and God promises that he will always be with us. When I was 12 or 13, I was given the opportunity to join the Order of the Arrow, which is a part of the Boy Scouts. Part of that ritual, part of that initiation into the Order of the Arrow is that you go to, for me it was Camp McMorris, and they put you out in the woods by yourself. Although they come and check on you, you just don't know they do. But you're in the woods by yourself. Now, I would love to say that I'm an outdoorsman, and I have tents. I mean, you can ask Kathy. I've got all kinds of things that make me look like an outdoorsman, but I'm probably more of the Williams-Sonoma Jacob. I like to be outdoors. I love it, but it's not the most comfortable place for me at times. And so Camp McMorris has a fire pit that we come to on the Friday night of camp. and it overlooks the Tennessee River. Well, that was my place. That was where the pickup truck dropped me off and said, "We'll see you in the morning." So I got the overlook of the Tennessee River. It's a beautiful night. About 2 hours later, though, a storm begins to roll in, and I think, well, it's not going to be that bad. Lightning starts striking. Thunder is just booming loud, as you can imagine, on the bluff, and I began to get a little fearful, wondering what I'm supposed to do. I didn't have to wonder too long. The pickup truck came and picked me up. We made it barely to a cabin that was housing all the cots that they used, and we weathered the storm there. What that experience taught me, though, is that I've got to learn to trust people. And for me, at that particular point, it was trusting the leaders that were in charge of me that I wasn't going to die in a storm at Camp McMorris away from my family. Remember, I'm a teenager, and anyway, I don't like storms. But it also helped me realize that I need to begin to learn to trust others. More importantly, trust God. Trust the one who has promised to protect me, to be there with me, and to walk with me. Louis Zamperini, a World War II veteran, an Olympic runner, the subject of the book Unbroken. He's part of a bomber crew that was shot down. 3 of the crew survived. He was one of them. They floated for 40 days, in which one of the 3 ended up passing away. They were captured by the Japanese. They were given a little bit of time to recover from their injuries, and then they found themselves in a POW camp. Zamperini recalls that they were tortured and beaten. A particular guard by the name of the Bird interrogated and beat Zamperini because of his fame as an Olympic runner, hoping that he could do something to Zamperini to break his hope and to break just that desire to live on. Zamperini and his crew had no idea of the tide of the war. They were in Tokyo when the bomb was dropped. It was shortly after that one of the guards came to him and said that the war was over and that America had in fact won. The Allies had won. They were released, sent home. Zamperini married a young woman whom he only knew for 2 weeks. They found themselves in a marriage that was struggling. He was addicted to alcohol, and his wife finally came to him and said, "I want a divorce." It was then that young Zamperini found himself at a revival led by a young Billy Graham. And it was at that particular event and that night that he found himself giving his life to God, giving his life to Jesus Christ. I can imagine what that struggle must have been like, much like Jacob, much like the struggle he had on the night before he met Esau. A struggle basically admitting to the fact, I've got to trust you, God. You have promised to be with me. And that's all that we do when we begin to journey with Christ and we become a disciple of Christ. That's what we do. We live in the basic truth that what God promises is what He will do. Barbara Brown Taylor has written a book, Learning to Walk in the Dark. In it, she talks about darkness, and she says that darkness for her is defined by anything that scares her, anything that gives her fear or anxiety. And she said, but what I've learned in the darkness is I learn more of who God is. I learn more of who I am supposed to be because I learned to trust. She said, I don't know why I don't like the darkness. I don't know if it's because I'm fearful of that I don't have the resources to survive whatever event or moment it is, or if it's the fear that I just don't want to try and see those resources. But she said, darkness is where I have learned the most. I've learned to trust in God. I've learned to realize that His promise to Jacob, His promise to Abraham, His promise that continues on down as we read the Bible story, those promises come to us and they are ours. Barbara Brown Taylor said, the one logical conclusion for me anytime I'm in the dark is that it's better for me to be in the dark sometimes than it is to be in the light. Because when we're in the light, we tend to trust ourselves more than we trust God. But when we're in those moments of despair and those moments of anxious thoughts and those fears and those doubts, when we're in those dark times, that's when we begin to trust in the God that promised to be with Jacob always and to bring Jacob home. Psalm 139 talks about how we cannot get away from God. There is nowhere we can go. But it also talks about how God knows us, knows every part of who we are. Zamperini was quoted as saying, God knew my needs and acted accordingly. God knew my needs and acted accordingly. If you go home today and read Psalm 139, I think you'll find that quote pretty much sums up Psalm 139. God knows us. There's nowhere that we can go in which God can't find us. We can go to the depths of Sheol. We can go to the heights of heaven. We can go to the far reaches of the earth. We can be on the sea. We can be on the tallest mountain. You name it. We can be anywhere in this cosmos, and God will find us. And God will come to us, and God will speak His promise to us. Mark Buchanan at Fourth Presbyterian Church in Illinois talks about this dream of Jacob's. And he says, listen, this dream is a dream of all of us. It's a time in which anxieties, fear, doubt are washed away. It's a time in which we come face to face with the one who has always promised us. And hopefully we don't act like Jacob. Hopefully we don't look at God or respond to God with a big if. But he said this dream, this interaction with God is the moment. It is the moment in which we can gain a better understanding of who God is. God is the one who has promised to one, but not only one, but promised to a nation and to an entire group of people. What I love about this particular dream, what I love about, honestly, Jacob's interaction with God, and I'm going to use the words of Walter Brueggemann. He said it's seeds of incarnation. This entire story shares with us and shows us what God is going to do. And what does God do? Eventually, He works through prophets, He works through judges, He works through various people until finally He sends His Son, Jesus Christ. Old Testament professor takes a dream and goes all the way to the fact that God is with us. God is with us in the form of Jesus Christ. God is with us, transforming our fears and doubts, leading us through the darkness to the light, sharing His promise with us. Seeds of incarnation. God looked at Jacob. He said, you know what? You've tricked people. You've run from people. You've run from me. You've lied. You've cheated. But here's my word to you. I'm with you now. I will be with you always. I will protect you. I will bring you back to this place unharmed. I will bring you back to this place, and I will not leave you until I have done everything that I have promised you. What an amazing promise. We see that promise throughout every story that we read in the Bible, every interaction that God has. And we come to this place here today knowing that we have fears and anxieties, that we struggle with our faith, that we struggle and we're fearful of what is happening in the world around us. And while I can't give you the answers to everything, I can give you this. God is with us. God will protect us. And that promise that He made to Jacob is the same promise He makes to us. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, Amen.